its engine dead and its lights extinguished. Farland listened a moment, then went forward and examined the machine. He knew the model, and he was an excellent driver. Once more he stopped to listen. Then he sprang behind the wheel and operated the starter. He drove slowly down the lane, the engine almost silent, the car traveling slowly. He proceeded in that manner until he had reached the highway. There he switched on the lights, put on speed, and sent the powerful car roaring along the winding road toward the river. Jim Farland, being a modest man, never did tell the entire story of that night. He drove like a fiend, narrowly escaping collision a score of times. He made his way along the roads running alongside the broad river, and finally came opposite the city. He crossed over a bridge, drove through the streets with what speed he dared, left the car at a public garage with certain instructions, and hurried to a telephone. He was unable to get either Sidney Prale or Murk, for at that hour they were on their way to the Griffin residence. Farland telephoned to his wife to say that he was all right, but would not be home until some time during the day. Then he engaged a taxicab and began his work. He knew where to start now. An idea had come to him in that old house far up the river, a suspicion, a feeling of certainty that he was on the right track. Jim Farland was no respecter of persons that night. When morning came he stopped only for a cup of coffee, and then worked on. He dashed from one place to another, running up a taxicab bill that made the chauffeur smile. He interviewed important gentlemen, threatening some and cajoling others, but always getting the information that he desired. At 2:00 the following afternoon he stood on a certain corner near Madison Square, his suspicion almost proved, his investigation at an end. "Now for the big bluff," Jim Farland said to himself. He fortified himself with another cup of coffee, got into the taxicab again, and started downtown. He was smoking one of his big black cigars, puffing at it as if in deep contentment, not looking at all like a man who had been kept a prisoner a night and a day, and had been busy since that experience. The taxicab stopped before an office building, as Jim Farland had ordered. The detective pulled out his last money and paid the chauffeur. "You've got more coming, son, but this is all I have with me," Farland said. "Drop in at my office any time after 10 tomorrow morning and get it." "Yes, Mr. Farland, and thanks." "You're a good boy, but keep your mouth shut," Farland told him. Then he hurried into the office building, went to the elevator nearest the entrance, and ascended to the floor where George Lerton had his suite of offices. The office boy stepped to the railing. "Mr. Lerton busy?" Farland asked. "He is alone in his private office, sir," said the boy, who regarded the detective with admiration and awe. After Farland's other visit, the youth had decided to be a detective when he grew up. "I am to go right in. Important business," Farland said. "Never mind announcing me." The willing boy opened the gate, and Farland hurried across to the door of the private office. He paused there a moment and seemed to pull himself together, as if making sure before entering the room of questions he wanted to ask and information he wanted to gather. Then he threw the door open, stepped quickly inside, closed the door, and turned the key. Lerton was sitting at his desk with his back to the door. He made no move until he heard the key turned. Then he whirled around in his desk chair. Great Scott, Farland, how you startled me!" he exclaimed. "I thought it was my secretary." "Pardon me for butting in this way, but I am in a deuce of a hurry and told the boy it was all right," Farland said. "You'll smash my office discipline doing things like this. But sit down, man. What is it now? Has that cousin of mine been acting up again, or are you going to pester me with a lot of fool questions about things I don't know anything about?" Farland had seated himself in the chair at the end of the desk, within 4 feet of George Lerton. He had tossed his hat to a table and twisted the cigar into one corner of his mouth. Now he stared Lerton straight in the eyes. "You look like a madman," Lerton said. "Why on earth are you looking at me like that? You look as if you were ill." The expression in Farland's face made him stop, and he appeared to be a bit disconcerted. "Why did you kill Rufus Shepley?" Jim Farland demanded, suddenly, in a voice that seemed to sting. Lerton's face went white for an instant. His jaw dropped and his eyes bulged. Are you insane?" he gasped. "What on earth do you mean by this? I'll call a clerk and—" "The door is locked," Farland said, taking the automatic from his pocket. "You raise your voice, touch a button, or make any move that I do not like, and I'll plug you and say afterward that I had placed you under arrest and had to shoot when you tried to escape. Answer my question, Lerton. You are at the end of your rope. Why did you kill Rufus Shepley and then try to hang the crime on your cousin, Sidney Prale?" "This is preposterous!" Lerton exclaimed. "Oh, I've got the goods on you, Lerton. I wouldn't be here talking like this if I didn't. You're going to the electric chair." Lerton laughed rather nervously. "I always thought that you were a good detective, Jim, but I'm beginning to have doubts now," he said. "What has put such an idea into your head?" "Facts gathered and welded together," Farland told him. "Don't try to carry out the bluff any longer, Lerton. And don't call me Jim. I never allow murderers to get familiar with me." "This has gone far enough," the broker exclaimed. "I'll have to ask you to leave my office, sir." "I expect to do that little thing before long, and you are going with me," Farland said. There was a knock at the door. End of chapter 25. Recording by Roger Moline.